Hey everybody, welcome back to The Schlub Does. A few days before Christmas, I bought my first lathe, and as you can see in the pictures on the screen, these are some of the things that I've been able to turn since I bought it. I've made about a dozen projects on it, and now that I've got some idea of what I'm doing, I'm gonna go ahead and make a video for you guys, an absolute beginner's project. So, my shop is actually a metal frame canvas tent, and we're going to start between what's called the spur center, which I just inserted, and then a live center. So it's called turning between centers, or spindle turning. And I don't mark the center like you see on some of the other videos because frankly I don't have the center marker, and I just kind of guesstimate it. I figure if it's a little out of balance to start with, the tools will turn it into balance. So that's what we're looking at here. I'm setting the tool rest. It worked out that this particular log was about the width of the tool rest, so I didn't have to really do anything drastic while I was working the piece. And I'm starting the lathe at about 600 RPMs because I'm going to be roughing up all this bark and the chips will fly off pretty good. As you can see, this gouge is not cutting. I actually bought a decent set off Amazon and pretty much ruined my big roughing gouge by sharpening it badly. So I went to Harbor Freight and bought this set for $25, hoping that, it would work. It did not. So I'm switching to a 3/8 spindle gouge. Not really the greatest for roughing, but it'll get the job done, just take a little longer. As you can see, the piece is catching there. It's because I didn't have the spur center really tight into the headstock. And I'm keeping all of my turning at real time. I'm not speeding up any of the turning because I want you to get an idea of what a beginner really looks like and how long it takes to do really simple things as a beginner. And as you can see, that 3/8 gouge is truing up this log pretty quick. Now there, I close the flute a little bit and try to take off a little bit more material, but I kind of messed this one up also with my sharpening. So you see all those little lines in there. That's because the sharpening is not even at all, and I didn't want to go in another $100 and some odd to buy the sharpening jig, because the lathe was pretty expensive, then the bench grinder, then the stand and the tools, and all told, even going as cheap as I could, I'm in at about $1,300 just in the very basic stuff. So if you're looking to get into lathe work, just understand that it's not cheap. Now, I didn't go with the cheapest lathe I could find either. I went with a Win, and I forget the model number. It's a 14-inch by 20-inch variable speed. And here I'm cutting the tenon for my 4-jaw chuck, which is also a Win. It's not the greatest chuck, and I cut pretty bad tenons, so I've had pieces fly off the chuck as I'm trying to hollow out. Fortunately, I'm getting better at it. For whatever reason, I had a hard time getting this to thread onto the headstock. I usually don't, but maybe it was just nerves from being on camera. And when I'd use the 4-jaw chuck, I like to set it in there and then put the tailstock up to it and tighten it down. That'll hold it into the 4-jaw chuck. And that way I can make sure that when I tighten it down, I've got pressure on it to keep it completely straight and level in the chuck. Even though the jaws will automatically center, if you put it in at an angle, it's going to center it at an angle, if that makes sense. And then this is the drawback of this wind chuck, is it doesn't have the turnkey tightening. You have to use these two those two rods, and it'll loosen up a little bit, and you have to kind of go back and tighten it a couple of times. Now what I'm doing here, or what my original plan was here, was to mark out what my waist was going to be. I wasn't going to shape past where I'm marking this out, and I'm trying to mark it even with the chuck. That way it gives me room to part the piece when I'm done. It didn't turn out that way, and right there I caught the parting tool on the edge of the chuck, and you'll see here in a little bit that took the edge right off of that parting tool. And I try to fight through it, but I wind up having to go and sharpen it. And now I'm just going to face off the top of the piece. I just want to get a nice flat top to it. And as you can see, knocking that edge off that parting tool, it is just not cutting. I can't get it to move at all. You see all that stuff at the tip that's hanging up on the tip when I pulled it back. That's getting caught up in that little dull area that got knocked into it when I hit the chuck. So I'm going to go to the grinder and give it a quick hit with the grinder. You'll notice it doesn't take very long at all to put an edge back on this thing. And you can see the tool is moving much better now, and you see the chips coming out are a lot more volume of chips. And I'm back to my 3/8 spindle gouge, and I'm going to start roughing out the shape. I don't really at this point have any idea of what I want this thing to look like, and I really never do. I don't even really have any idea usually of what I'm making when I put a log on there, because I'm just trying to get a feel for how a lathe works and the tools. So whatever comes out is what comes out. This particular project's a little bit different because I do know exactly what I want to make. I just don't know what the shape is going to be. And you'll see several times throughout the project that the tools will catch and they'll put a gouge somewhere where I didn't want it. And as a beginner, I think that's probably something everybody's going to have to deal with. And, you know, you just kind of let the tool determine what the shape is going to be sometimes until you learn how to control the tools a little better. So when I get a catch and it puts a mark where I don't want it, I just, you know, either take off more material or I'll make a little shoulder or a cove or something, and I'll just make it a feature of the piece. You see there, I pulled away from the wood a little bit, so instead of that clean cutting that I was getting, it left all those tool marks in the middle and didn't really cut. And here I've decided that the lip that I had on there is too thick, and I wanted to shorten it down a little bit. And you can see I'm not really trying to power through my cuts here. I'm trying to take my time and go slow. I've been trying to keep the tool marks out of the piece with my gouges, but because of the way I've sharpened them, I think that's pretty much impossible. And now I'm taking the round scraper here, and this is because I got so many tool marks. I use the round scraper to clean up the profile and to take the tool marks out of the piece. And you'll see when I stop it that it really does an excellent job of getting all those little gouge lines out. But with the scraper, the one thing I've really learned is that's exactly what it is. It's a scraper. It's not a cutter. You can take some material off with it, but you're really wanting light pressure, barely make contact with the piece, and you just want to scrape all of that excess tool marks out. You know, if you've got shavings hanging to the piece, just very, very light contact. You'll see at one point here that I get a catch, and it winds up, you know, gouging pretty good. And I think if I was better with the lathe, I think a lot of this cleanup that I'm doing here with the scraper probably wouldn't be necessary. So there's the catch right there. So that's something that you want to be cognizant of, is it's going to take a while to do really simple projects, but once you get better with your tool handling, all of this fine cleaning up probably won't be necessary. You can probably go right to sandpaper once you're done with your gouges. And I'm setting the tool rest now because I want to hollow out a little bit of the top here. I'm not going to hollow out a lot. I'm basically just putting a concave profile into the top because later I'm going to drill into it. And I'm just running the gouge slowly in, creating a little dowel at the tip that's going to keep it on the spindle, on the live center. And then I'm just using the scraper. I had a catch there, so I'm just cleaning up where that gouge caught onto the wood. And this is going to be a lesson in know when to stop. See, I got a catch there, which actually kind of helped me out because it put that cove wide enough that I could get the whole scraper in there and get all the tool marks out. But really, all of this excess scraping that I'm doing here wasn't necessary. The piece was clean enough that I could have just went right to sanding, but I decided to screw around with it a little bit more and wound up having to take more material than I wanted to because I had some bad spots, and like right there, the tool caught. So an important part of really any making project is know when to stop. You see, I have all those shavings hanging off, and now I have to take more material off because I just didn't know when to stop. But you can see I'm using very light touches with the scraper. I want to try to take as little material as I possibly can. And that looks pretty good. The tool marks are pretty much gone, and now it's time to go to sanding. And I'm going to speed through the sanding because everybody's seen sanding. It's not a great mystery. So we're just going to speed through it. The one thing that I did learn is that if you wet sand, and I use linseed oil because that's what I have, but I've seen people use mineral oil and some different type of detergents. But what this does is it fills in any kind of imperfections. If you do have some tool marks or some scratches, the oil kind of creates like a dust slurry and kind of fills those in. And when you wipe it off, you get a baby smooth finish. And I only take this up to 500 because there's really no need to take it up any higher than that. And then this is just a chuck adapter for the tailstock, and I've got a Forstner bit in. And just very slowly, this is sped up as well, but very slowly, backing off constantly, drill the hole. And then I've got a 4-inch extension that I use when I need the hole to be a little bit deeper. And I'm just using the shop vac on reverse to blow out the hole and blow off some of the dust off the lathe. And here you can see I'm having to part now areas that were part of the profile of the vase because I forgot that all of that material I took off in the beginning was supposed to be my waste side. And this here is a 1.5 by 1.5 piece of 2x4, just regular yellow pine stud lumber. It was left over from a project I did making some chairs. And I'm clamping it down because I want to drill a hole in the center, and I don't have a drill press. The reason I'm showing this is because preparation and taking the time to do things as right as you can do them is very important. And you'll see in here in a minute why. And as you can see, I'm trying to get it centered, but when I put this bit in, the bit's going in pretty straight, pretty, perpendicular to the wood. Nice, good, straight hole. I'm speeding this part up as far as the turning goes because I get aggressive with the gouge, and pine, not only is it a pretty soft wood, but the fibers are so large that it's also kind of a brittle wood. It just chips away, and if you get a weak spot, then you wind up with that. It split right down the middle in the hole I drilled. And I showed you that setup on the first one so I could show you this because I'm upset and I just get impatient and I try to drill this hole, and you can already see that that bit is not going in anywhere near straight. So instead of taking the literal 5 minutes it would have taken to set this up and drill a straight hole, I put it in an angle. And you're going to see at the end that that's a very bad thing. Now for this one, I'd sharpened up my 1/2-inch roughing gouge to try to take a little bit more material off so I wouldn't have to be so aggressive with the spindle gouge or with a 3/8 gouge. And I'm getting catches here and I'm just tightening down as I go. But after splitting that first piece, I am absolutely terrified I'm going to split this piece. So I am taking just tiny bits of material off at a time, going real slow. And while you're watching me mangle this yellow pine, I did want to mention that even though I didn't slow down the turnings or speed up the turnings to save time on the video, I did cut away in between the turnings, spending time looking for tools and sandpaper and just general wandering and meandering trying to find things that I needed. And I'm notoriously bad at organization, but I do just kind of want to mention, if you have the ability and the space to organize yourself, you really want to do that. I know that seems obvious, but my quote-unquote shop here is literally, it's a wooden floor with a metal frame and tarp around it. There's not a lot of space in it. I don't have a legitimate workbench or anything, so I just kind of set things down on whatever flat surface I find. The entire project from start to finish took about an hour and 15 minutes. If I hadn't spent all of the time that I did just hunting down things that I set down some random place, probably would have gotten done with this in about 45 minutes. So that's just something to keep in mind. I wanted to mention it, even though it certainly seems like it's an obvious thing. Organization saves a lot of time. Also, if you have the time, energy, desire, and skill, you might want to script your episodes if you happen to do YouTube. I'm pretty impatient, so this is going to come off probably as a big, long babble session. And if it does, I apologize. I probably won't ever get to the point where I change. But, that's just how this schlub rolls. Kind of fly by the seat of my pants. As you can see, I'm being really super careful as I'm starting to thin this out because I'm so terrified that it's going to break. And, at some point, I realized that hole I drilled has now blown through the edge, and I've decided, I wind up stopping with the tools, because even though it's going to look gross, at least it's going to go together the way I want, which I know I haven't told you exactly what I'm making here. And that's the whole point. I want you to watch at the end of the video. And again, pull out the scraper and do my level best to clean up these ragged edges. And I switched from my parting tool to my skew chisel. for the fine point to break that last little bit off. And I cleaned it up off, and you can see now what I'm making here. I'm inserting a pin tube, a ballpoint pin tube, and you see that nasty, nasty hole in the side where that hole blew right out. 5 minutes of preparation would have saved me. And now we get to the final project. And the idea was, you see those ballpoint pens with flowers taped to them at the doctor's office and B&B and all of that. And I thought it'd be nice to make a fancy version of that. Something you could give somebody as a gift and they could put it on their desk and whatnot. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you made it to the end, congratulations. You get a gold star for listening to my horrifying voice for 30 minutes.